Hi, welcome to Expressions. I'm Julie Robbins. Today you're going to meet Mark Ford, who is a landscape designer, and Mark is going to show us two types of landscapes. One is an English cottage garden, and the other is a Japanese garden. Both are quite different, but both are wonderful expressions of nature. We're starting today in front of this English cottage garden, and here to tell us about it is Mark Ford, who's a landscape designer.
Yes.
Okay, good to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Before we do talk about the garden, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved in this?
Well, I always had an interest in plants and any living organic material. My grandfather was from Manchester, England, and grew plants, so when we visit him, I was kind of immersed in that from an early age. And then I've always had an artistic bent, so I love to design. And with landscape gardens, you're designing with living organic material, and that's your palette of colors or your plants. So, and also you have somewhat of a nice legacy. Each year they get a little bit bigger, more attractive, and also get an intimate relationship with your customers because you're actually building and designing for them, and they have a tendency to utilize their garden and outdoors much more. And really with the English cottage garden effect, you're building little rooms outside. The English typically have smaller lots, and they try to pack those lots full of plants and with a lot of color and long duration of flower.
This is beautiful. Now we're on the corner of a very busy street.
Yes.
Does that play in part of why she wanted some of this?
Actually, it definitely did. We wanted a nice display with this many cars going by. We wanted actually to show off the house and also show off the plants. Instead of just having a ubiquitous green lawn with a few annual plants, we wanted something that really catch people's eyes. It definitely, at times, will slow traffic down, and certainly we have lots of people turn in, and that's, I think, what we kind of do, because I don't know, you festoon the garden with a tremendous amount of color, and people do like that. And it's relaxing. It also gives somewhat of a buffer sound-wise, but I think mostly you have that harsh traffic going by, and then you kind of soften it with the beautiful plants.
All right. Okay, let's get started here. What are we looking at?
Okay, a large profusion of color and flowers. What we had to do here is we're obviously in a full sun area, and we'll have a lot of radiated heat from this driveway, but there's a tremendous amount of plants that do quite well. A lot of your herbs, many of your different types of perennial sages from, let's say, Western China. Certainly this plant here is one of the Russian sages. It's not an edible sage, but definitely one that's very attractive.
Oh, it sure is.
And continually to bloom. The sky blue color, especially in midsummer, is tremendous, and that will continue to go all the way through to the hard freezes. It also has white stalks on it, so in midwinter, if we have a relatively mild winter, it will stay and will not die back to the ground. But it is a perennial, so it would come back if we do have a typically
So it will come back next year.
Cooler than normal, yes. And everything in here is a perennial. There are some begonias that have been planted, but the vast majority of things are perennials. That way you're paying for them. Each year they get a little bit bigger, more spectacular, and try to utilize things that have a very long period of bloom instead of something ephemeral like azaleas. Tulips that are gone in 2 or 3 weeks. There's no reason to have that, because especially with our heat in the summertime, take advantage of that, and many of these plants love the heat, and the more sun you give them, the more they're going to flower.
Yeah.
And then as we move up, actually down here we have one of the dwarf, it's a nano blue butterfly bush, and in England they call this summer lilac, and I'll kind of just pull a little plant off, and the English always try to utilize fragrance. And it has a light lilac smell. There's very many different varieties of these. Their botanical name's Buddleia, and typically majority of them come from Western China, Central China, so they like a tremendous amount of heat. They always bloom on new wood, so the more you prune them, the more flowers you're going to get, and typically these will start blooming in June all the way through the hard freezes. Then we've kind of played it off with just what is a dwarf blue spruce, and the variety is globosa. And it'll just stay this tall. It's grafted on dwarf rootstock, and we just keep it pruned about once a year into a nice round shape. So in midwinter we have some things that are beacons that are evergreen that give us nice color. Also the blue is quite nice because we have a lot of blues in the Russian sage and the butterfly bushes also. And down here actually it's gone past flowering, but we'll come back in probably another week or two and flower again as one of the pincushion flowers. It's scabiosa, which is a relatively horrible name, but a beautiful plant. But if you can play those colors off the blue evergreen, that's a wonderful idea too.
It almost looks like you have a mixture in seasons. This looks real wintry to me, you know, with the spring type thing. So that's really, really neat that you can do that. Mark, I see a couple of ladybugs on here. They're beautiful.
Yes, and typically trying to do what the English do. There it's so compacted. There's so many people that live close by that they don't use a tremendous amount of chemicals, much less than what we use here in America. So try to use beneficial bugs. So several times during the year we'll bring out ladybugs, praying mantises, anything that's beneficial that'll take the aphids off. And actually this plant here has a somewhat interesting story to it. It's a sunflower, and the homeowner actually feeds little finches, the birds around here, and apparently one of them's brought a seed. This is a volunteer, but actually kind of fortuitous, so we decided to keep it. Down here we have one of the beautiful balloon flowers, and there's white and blue varieties, and these have been blooming for months on end, and that's what you want to utilize in Tulsa, things that are going to bloom continually.
Is this as tall as these get right here?
Yes, most definitely. You can see how it gets its name. It has little, almost like balloons as it forms on it. And again, very attractive. Kind of just adjacent to it is one of the Stellodora lilies, and this is one that will bloom typically maybe, in our climate, 5 months out of the year, so it's not something that's very ephemeral. It looks very attractive. And then actually one of the Missouri goldenrods down here that's just starting to come into bloom itself. This is a Japanese bloodgood maple.
Right here.
You can see that through the hot summer we've had, it's not like that too much, but you can see the new buds on it, so it hasn't really deteriorated. And it's also a defense mechanism. When it gets too hot, the plant is always expiring moisture through its leaves, so it decides, I'm going to lose my leaves, so I'm not going to lose any more moisture. And you can see it hasn't hurt it at all, and we'll have another flush of growth probably in a week's period of time when we have the lower night temperatures, and so we'll have a deep red. And the Japanese bloodgood maple actually is a sport that came from a Long Island nursery. It's one of the few Japanese maples that actually could be considered indigenous to the United States.
How tall does the Japanese maple get? Is that it?
No, it'll actually probably get, depending in a few years, 12 to 15 foot tall. So it has a beautiful canopy, and the red burgundy leaf looks quite nice. And also with it being a good variety, in midwinter it actually has a burgundy-like bark to it. Not a brilliant burgundy, but it has some nuances. And that's the one thing in design, that as you continue on, you like foliage texture, you also like the color of bark. Things like that can definitely enhance it. And also always be thinking that you're going to have plants that you're trying to utilize as focal points, and then play off that. Now right next to it is another one of the butterfly bushes. Again, it's continually blooming. It's called white profusion. And the white is typically in summer. If you can have white on your landscape, it makes it look much nicer, much cleaner.
Yeah.
And that's just a wonderful look. Down here we have a really interesting plant. This one right here is one of the dwarf yarrows, and actually this, you can see it's getting quite large now, but it's a terracotta variety. It's a new variety that's just come out in the last few years. We're in late September now. Now it's bloomed 2 times already, and it's reblooming again. It has a beautiful texture, almost looks like a fern, but since it is a herb, it's something that will take the heat. It's a very tough plant. And then kind of playing off that, right next to it is one of the white balloon flowers. Again, they continually blooming. And then right on top, like the English cottage garden effect, they don't like to do a lot of weeding, so you pack all your plants together, shoulder to shoulder, cuts down on the sunlight hitting the ground, so you have less weed seeds that are going to be germinating, and it's much easier to take care of. And also you don't have to stake as much. A lot of these plants don't require staking, but when you have them shoulder to shoulder, they cascade into each other, and that's what you want to look. You want to walk back and look, and a lot of times the English say that they want almost like a Monet painting effect. They want blocks of color and from a distance.
All just blended
Exactly.
together.
Instead of something that's very formal, 2 or 3 plants here, then move over a couple of feet, a couple more plants. As it matures, comes into its own, and usually on these gardens, within about 4 to 5 months after they're planted, they're coming into their own.
Mark, what a sight to see. As you're coming home, you walk down this beautiful path here. It's gorgeous.
We're definitely wanting here to enhance the natural curve and have lots and lots of color. Also, there's rosemary, there's thyme, there's a lot of fragrant herbs along here. So as you enter the doorway and people would come to visit, they're going to be not overwhelmed, but they'll definitely have a nuance of a nice aroma as they walk in.
So relaxing, lose the stress.
Exactly. And with the herbs too, a lot of my customers have a tendency to cook. So with the chives or the thyme or certainly the rosemary, there's a lot of people that do grilling. You can chop that off, put it on your chicken. So in the way the English feel about gardens too, there should be some definitely culinary herbs, some things that are edible on the property that you can utilize, and there's no reason why you can't utilize herbs like rosemary, which will have pretty flowers, lavender, some of the thyme also that you can cook with, but also since they are a herb, they do a tremendously good job. And they give you a nice visual effect. A lot of the herbs will stay evergreen also through the winter. So you're also thinking about 4 seasons of color.
Okay, what about the plants on this side?
This side's showing you a little bit different. This we really haven't touched. It was originally here and they just used in patience. There are azaleas in the back. Typically the English don't utilize azaleas, they utilize rhododendrons. Rhododendrons do very well in our climate, but the azaleas do a lot better in full sun. Rhododendrons have a tendency to get sun scald.
But it goes well with everything else.
Yes, kind of. And then as we walk down here, we just use some pavers to definitely draw your eye through, and they're just blue mist pavers. And then on either side of it, you can see the purple coneflower that's known as the king of daisies, just starting to come into own. Also, next to it, one of the burgundy blanket flowers, which is a gorgeous, it's Gaillardia, and then next to it is a white swan coneflower.
Mark, I've noticed at the end of the lawn by the street, you've kind of framed the yard there with a little gardening.
Certainly, and the main effect of that is we're trying to, since it has a relatively small property, we want to go to the very extent of the edge of the property, and that will draw your eye out there. So typically it makes the yard look somewhat bigger. And then also when you have like the blue mist shrub out there, that draws your eye. There's an evergreen Nellie Mosler holly that will keep into a nice, almost a pyramid shape, like a Christmas tree. Also evergreen, it'll have the red berries on it too, so you have some effect. And also we're using the same sort of cobblestone along there also. So that, it gives some sort of context to the design. Everything looks like it's matched up well, and you want it to meld together quite
And
well
just
also.
a little bit more privacy, isn't it?
Yes, most definitely. It has some effect like that, and it does kind of delineate your property from the next person's, and it always has a nice visual effect. And also think about foliage. Instead of just green foliage, go for some that's maybe lime green, some blues, silvers, golds, anything like that as far as color and texture of your foliage really enhances the landscape, because you go around most properties in Tulsa and you see just ubiquitous green plants. You want some things that have maybe a purple color to them, and that really enhances the design effect.
Right. Well, that's it for the English cottage garden look at things, and when we come back, you're going to get to see some Japanese gardens. Mark's going to take a look at it, so we'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, we're still in the Utica Square area, but Mark, it looks like we've traveled halfway around the world.
Yes, most definitely. It's our interpretation of Japan in Tulsa, I guess.
Well, let's take a look. And we have 2 entrances here, but
Yes.
we're going to take the larger entrance here,
Okay.
right?
Most
And
definitely.
Is this an Oriental, Japanese?
Yes,
Is that what-
Japanese feel to it, and actually was created by a wonderful carpenter here in town named Joe White. And we took some books and got some designs that were actually Japanese, and he worked it in and made magic out of it.
Well, let's go through
Okay.
it. Very lightweight, too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, isn't this beautiful?
And
Okay,
hope-
Mark, what did you start with in this yard? Was it just a plain yard?
Yes,
And-
basically we had some of the large southern magnolias and the oak trees and the white cedar, but all the beds were done, and tried try to create areas, a visual effect like the Japanese do of islands. So these actually represent islands. The grass hopefully is to represent the sea. And they just floating in those and give you a real effect of what they would call in Japan a Japanese Zen garden, where you can sit down, be very restful and relaxing.
Yeah.
Not a tremendous amount of blooms. You don't want a lot of flowers. You want color and texture, but less is definitely more.
Simple.
And even simple things like the Japanese do with this cedar signpost, which is actually wishing you loyalty and happiness and a long spring. Something that typically as you enter a Japanese garden, you'll have something like that that's wishing a blessing upon you. And we've done really here just a small Zen shrine that you typically would see in most gardens, and just utilize really cut limestone, some blue mist pavers. The Japanese definitely incorporate a lot of stonework in their Japanese gardens. That's probably one of the most important features. You're wanting to have definitely evergreen plants, you're wanting definitely to have stonework, and also you're wanting to have a water feature. And typically the Japanese also, you'll have an entry stone, and there'll usually be several stones that have a lot of character. This is a large, probably weighs about 500 to 700 pound limestone rock that was near a waterfall and had a natural cleft in it. So we incorporated that, and gives you an effect of just entering, but also it's definitely a sculptural piece too, and the Japanese definitely use stones to enhance the gardens. They don't want a tremendous amount of them, a few focal points, and then on the front is basically a type of surface limestone. It's what we would consider here in Oklahoma riprap. But
Okay.
Each one of them probably weighing around 100 to 150 pounds. And this is also supposed to give the illusion of an island or a mountain that's sitting in the water with the grass being, and also very easy to maintain at the same time. And you can see that it starts to get lichen and moss on it, gets a patina. Same thing with your Japanese lantern. You want over time that to look older and older, and gives you a real nice visual effect.
So it's
And
okay if it's weathered then?
yes,
we like
most
that.
definitely. The Japanese definitely want something that looks relatively old. Typically, they always use rock benches. And
Yeah, why is that? I've noticed as I look around the yard, you do have quite a bit of benches.
they're similar
and
in
seating.
some ways to where the English have a lot of structure in their gardens. The Japanese want things of utility, and definitely they can utilize the benches also to display their bonsais. So they give you some utility you can sit on, but also the visual effect. See, underneath this area, when we initially started out, we have a giant southern magnolia here, and it produces a lot of leaf litter, and at the same time nothing was growing underneath here, so we've come in with what the Japanese use. It's 3/8 inch limestone gravel, filled this in, gives wonderful positive drainage, it eliminates your problems with slugs, and then also have another like marble sign here that's also wishing you loyalty and happiness. And some cut stone benches, so if you would come out here and sit
Sit
your
under the
tea,
tree and
maybe have some
relax.
green tea and sit and relax. But typically I have an idea that you'd come out here, sit down, and just kind of absorb everything. Everything should be nice and quiet and should be definitely otherworldly, and you should have just a sea of green around you.
This is so peaceful back here.
Yes, and kind of utilize surface limestone here on the walkway, and also utilizing the Japanese 3/8 inch limestone gravel, which is wonderful because it's very inexpensive material. Gives you wonderful positive drainage. And on this, we've just simply come in and I've cut back the soil about 8 to 10 inches, removed the soil, and then just brought this limestone in, and then used the larger surface limestone, which has some nice nuances in it, different fossils. It's a wonderful edging, won't move at all, and very low maintenance, and you can definitely come in here with a lawn crew, or if you have an edger, hit right up against it. It's not going to deteriorate at all. And looks very nice also with the rain or when the sprinkler system comes on, because there's little puddles of water. Definitely your birds will fly down,
Right.
and that's kind of nice to kind of bring nature into the landscape also. This is called Harry Lauder's walking stick, but it's a contorted hazelnut and looks beautiful in midwinter with the scaffolding, but at the same time you see the corrugated leaf, and the Japanese definitely utilize that. They want plants that have a lot of structure. And then adjacent to that is one of the best varieties of small Japanese maples. It's a Japanese Crimson Queen. Very prostrate growing, cascading over.
It's like a bush, not a tree,
Yes, and
right?
its botanical name, it's Acer palmatum, and then it's a Dissectum atripurpureum, which is a long botanical name, but basically means that the leaves are cut. It's a palmatum, so it's like a hand, and it will turn in to early spring all the way through until we have extremely strong sunlight, it'll have a deep burgundy color. This area was very mired in mud and mildew, and it was a bad drainage area. Came in, removed soil, put in about 8 to 12 inches of the 3/8 inch limestone gravel, and then utilized how the Japanese do limestone that has a lot of character to it to represent really islands. So we're kind of looking at this as it's an island or a stream with mountains growing amongst it through the year. Then we kind of step through this main stone and enter another kind of small Zen garden, trying to utilize this area here. And kind of incorporated in here also some of the different bonsais, which we can kind of see on either side. The one thing about this variety, it's called Kashima, and it's one of the very smallest varieties of Japanese maple. And you always would like to leave the root system exposed, so it gives a lot of color and texture. Also with your bonsais, you always want to leave them outside, so it sits here all year round. Very small leaf with this Kashima variety also. And we've kind of played off with it. Next to it is just a natural limestone piece that had a natural cleft in it from being underneath a waterfall. And so kind of utilized that. Just simply brought a small piece of copper tubing that also gets a nice patina on it, and underneath this gravel and this cut limestone and the glacier rock and your cut pink granite, which is from Arizona, there's a basin with a small recirculating pump. Very simple. It adds a nice bit of sound. You see the squirrels and the birds are out here, so you get the nice trickle sound, but nothing overpowering.
Mark, would you say that this area is more of like a meditation type area?
Most definitely. Again, we're trying to mimic nature, so we have what we consider a river here. This area over here would be a valley, and then in the midst of the river we have different sorts of mountains. Also it's surface limestone again, which has a lot of character. So we're trying to mimic nature. We're trying to do 2 and 3 rock patterns, which the Japanese utilize quite often. And we're also trying to think that we're building our own little world, a little miniature world back here that no one else really has access to. It's something that we've created.
Mark, this backyard is so relaxing.
Yes, that's kind of one of the most important points in the Japanese garden. Not a lot of things going on, but color and texture. Definitely the path kind of delineates where you want to walk. You're being directed around a certain area and different focal points that really the designer wants you to see, and the plants are the things that are your palette of colors, so they power everything at the same time.
Now tell me, why are some stones on this pathway raised higher than others?
We kind of want to do what the Japanese do. They want you really to look where you're walking. And so when you have them a little higher than others, where normally you might stumble, it gives you that natural effect that you're going to have to really concentrate where you're walking. Exactly. And also, you always want to have in Japanese gardens, certainly some of the different varieties of bamboo. The Japanese have many different varieties they utilize, and this is a wonderful variety. You can see some of the older cane that's turned jet black, but it's a Japanese black timber bamboo. It's actually a variety called Nigra Hinan. Here we kind of have what the Japanese definitely also always have, and another water feature. And because we have this tea house here, I try to utilize the same type of wood, same type of varnish, and make it look definitely not natural, but at the same time you're using all natural material. And
but it's relaxing. Water is so relaxing.
Very relaxing, very simple, not much to it. The Japanese usually will always have near a water feature or a waterfall one of the varieties of Pyrrhus japonica here. And it's a plant that's related to azaleas, rhododendrons. It is evergreen. New growth on it is red like a photinia. In early spring there's cascades of white, waxy, berry-like flowers. It looks like really water frothing from a waterfall. So if you juxtapose these next to your water feature, it's something the Japanese always do. Utilize your backyard really as separate rooms. You can have different styles right next to each other. This was an area where we have a lot of sun. We wanted to utilize as a herb garden, and there's lemon balm, there's chives, tucarum, all sorts of different types of borages, wonderful monarda, so we can utilize these. There's rosemary, of course, and lavender in here. But there's no reason why you can't have a herb garden and directly across from it a Japanese garden. If it's a nice style, you can definitely utilize it. And also with the herb garden for culinary use, your chives, things like that, that you're going to get some actual use off of.
And it's your backyard. If you want to enjoy it,
Exactly.
you do what you want to,
That's
right?
how the Japanese and the English are. They're using the outdoor as outdoor rooms, and you can have a living room, you can have a den, you can have a room that's more contemporary or one that's more antique. So there's all different styles.
Okay, Mark, we'll walk on this way. Tell me a little bit about the ground coverings here and the different types of grass.
Since again we have the heavy shade, different types of lamium, there's hostas here, there's also a directional stone that normally all the Japanese gardens have, even a plant which has a somewhat hideous name, lungwort, but
Yeah.
one of the plumerias looks very attractive. It also has a green leaf with almost magenta in it at times, but also a pewter color, and that enhances
And this
the shade
is
areas.
another Japanese
Another Japanese Crimson Queen, with it being in heavy shade, it's more green. If you put it out in sun, there's more red in it. And we have definitely some fountain grasses, miscanthus.
Is that what this is right here?
Yes, and they have
Oh.
beautiful, starting to form, just starting to emerging now, some of the different, actually flower heads, but these are the seed heads. We leave those all winter long, so it gives you a real nice appeal through the winter, kind of sashaying back and forth with the wind, and very attractive. Again, more hostas, and even a variegated holly here, actually a type of boxwood, and looks very attractive, stays evergreen, and gives it a lot of color in a heavy shade area.
This has certainly been beautiful. Well, we're going to close the gate to the garden. We're also going to close the show. Mark,
Okay.
thank you so much for joining
Thank
us
you so
today.
much.
We've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
At least I have. And I hope you've enjoyed seeing the beautiful gardens that Mark has shown us today. Thank you for watching Expressions, and we'll see you next week.